Now, before we get into actually writing code, it's probably a good idea for me to go over some of the basic things you will need to know about the compiler for PineScript. So the compiler is what compiles our code, converts it into information that TradingView's servers can understand. So all of this English written code will turn into computer code that the computer can run and execute our commands. The PineScript compiler is responsible for doing that. So when I click save here, I'm just going to delete this script after. So I'll just name this delete. My script just compiled. And I know it compiled because I didn't get any errors. If, however, we do something like this, let me get rid of one of these parentheses here and save the script. Now we have a problem. We have a syntax error, this red line here. Now the wonderful thing about most programming languages and compilers is that they will usually tell you where the error happened. So we get the exact line that this error occurred on. It occurred on line 6, this line here. So that makes it really easy for us to, you can even click on this. It's a link that will take you to that line of code in your script. So if I click on that, it takes me straight there. Now, every error message will be different depending on what you messed up in your script. A lot of these error messages are quite cryptic. So end of line without line continuation, even I don't know what that really means. It's amusing to me, some of the error messages you get in some programming languages. Sometimes they're really helpful. Sometimes you're just like, wow, thanks, compiler. That was really helpful. So now if I close this off and save my script, we don't have any errors. The compiler compiled our code without any problems. Let's try getting rid of one of these quotation marks. Save the script. Now we get a different error, mismatched character. This character here means we have a new line starting. So PineScript got to the end of this line and then a new line started, but it was expecting this quotation mark to close off this string of text. And so it threw an error on line 5. So most of the problems in your script are going to be pretty obvious and intuitive. When you see an error pop up, usually it means you didn't close something off, you missed a comma, you missed a bracket, something like that. And within just a few seconds of reading your code back, you should be able to spot the problem. Now, some errors will be a little more difficult to solve, but in PineScript, it's very rare that you run into an error that can't be solved very quickly, because usually it's a result of a typo of some kind. And you don't even need to know what the error message means. You can just click on that line of code and see at a glance that you missed something relating to the syntax. I will cover errors in your code in much more detail in its own section of the course towards the end of the course. So if you run into any problems, maybe jump ahead and check out that section. But the last thing I'm going to show you here is what happens if we get rid of the compiler directive. If I get rid of that and save the script, now we're going to get all kinds of weird problems and errors with our code. The reason for that is that the compiler now doesn't know what version of PineScript we're using. So right now we are using the original version of PineScript, the versionless version of PineScript, the first iteration of this language. I have no idea what the syntax is for that language. I wasn't around when that was a thing. I started using PineScript when it was in version 3. And so recently version 5 has released. So I've had to learn the new syntax of PineScript 3 times now. I started with version 3, so I learned version 3 syntax. Then it updated to version 4 and I learned version 4 syntax. Now we're on version 5. The good news is it's not that much different to version 4. If I set the version to 4, save the script, we'll still get the same error, because in version 4 of PineScript, we don't use the indicator annotation function, we use the study annotation function to create an indicator. So now my script just compiled fine. And so it's very important that you keep this compiler directive in and that you get your syntax correct in your code. You don't need these comments if you don't want them there. This will compile just fine as well. The reason why we have this compiler directive that allows us to target older versions of PineScript is for backwards compatibility. So there are hundreds, if not thousands of scripts that have been written from the beginning of TradingView's existence that are still very useful, even though they were written in an old version of PineScript. And rather than force all of those coders to update their code to version 5 of PineScript, TradingView simply allow you to target old versions of PineScript so that you don't need to update your scripts for them to work. The only reason you would want to update your script to version 5 of PineScript is to take advantage of the new features of that version. So I have dozens of indicators written in version 4. I'm not going to convert all of them into version 5 of PineScript. except for the ones that I use regularly. Now, one last thing I want to mention about the compiler is that it is not particularly picky about where you put some of your syntax. For example, if you have a plot function that has a lot of parameters, which we'll cover in future lessons, you can separate them across multiple lines. Now, there are some rules with this that take some getting used to, but let me just quickly demonstrate what I mean by this. So for example, we could put a space between our plot and our parentheses, save the script, and this will work just fine. No problems, no compiler errors. We can also split our parameters across multiple lines. So if I press enter here and I tab indent this line of code and I save the script, we'll get an error. In PineScript, if you want to indent your parameters across multiple lines, you need to put a space after your tab. So now if I save the script, this compiles just fine. So the purpose of being able to do this is maybe you have a bunch of parameters in your plot function that stretch way off your screen. You can separate these onto multiple lines to make it easier to read your code. So for example, if I put a comma here and then enter, I could say offset equals 1, comma, title equals plot close, comma, line width equals 2, comma, and let's set the color to color.black. And then let's move this parentheses down one line. Now if I save the script, this compiles just fine. So we'll cover this sort of thing in future lessons. I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that the compiler is quite flexible when it comes to your syntax, just so long as everything is in the right order and you respect some of the indentation rules, which we'll cover in future lessons as well. But anyway, I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that we can do this sort of thing in PineScript. The compiler will allow us to separate our code across multiple lines under certain circumstances, as long as we respect certain syntax rules. I'll leave it there because I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much information before we actually cover what all of these parameters do. But now at least you know that when we get into future advanced lessons, that this sort of thing is possible if you need to separate your code across multiple lines. Anyway, that about sums it up for the compiler. I'm sure we will run into other issues that I haven't covered here that we'll address in future lessons, especially the error section of the course. So I'll wrap this up here and I'll see you in the next lesson.